The courtroom fell silent as James Richardson stood to deliver his closing argument. But something felt different this time. Something he couldn't explain would change his life forever in ways he never imagined. What happened in that London courtroom would lead this successful British lawyer down a path he never expected. And by the end of this story, you will understand why he walked away from everything he knew. James Richardson was not your average lawyer. He had built his reputation over 15 years defending high-profile cases in London. His office overlooked the Thames, his salary was in 6 figures, and his future seemed certain. He had everything society told him to want. Yet something was missing. A void he couldn't name. It started on a cold November morning in 2019. A new case landed on his desk. Khalid Ahmed, a Muslim shop owner, was being sued for religious discrimination by a former employee, who claimed Khalid refused to serve alcohol in his convenience store. James saw it as just another case, another fee, another win for his record. As James began preparing his defense, he needed to understand Islamic law and principles. He had never really studied Islam before. Sure, he had Muslim colleagues and neighbors, but he never thought deeply about their faith. He started reading, not just legal texts, but Islamic sources themselves to build a stronger case. One evening, while researching in his office, James came across a verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 256. There is no compulsion in religion. He stopped. Something about these words struck him deeply. Here was a religion being accused of forcing beliefs, yet its holy book explicitly stated the opposite. He read it again and again. The more James researched for the case, the more questions arose in his mind. He read about Islamic concepts of justice, mercy, and equality. He discovered that Islam had established legal rights for women, minorities, and even animals over 1,400 years ago, concepts that Western law only adopted in recent centuries. This was not what he expected. During the trial, James met Khalid's family. His wife brought homemade food to share. His children were polite and well-mannered. Khalid himself showed no anger toward his accuser, only sadness that his intentions were misunderstood. James watched how they prayed 5 times a day, even during the stressful trial, how they spoke with respect and patience. One day during a court recess, James asked Khalid a question that had been bothering him. "Why do you pray 5 times a day? Isn't that excessive?" Khalid smiled and said, "If someone you loved sent you 5 letters a day, would you read them?" James had no answer. Khalid continued, "Allah loves us more than anyone. He invites us to connect with Him 5 times daily. It's not a burden, it's a gift." That night, James couldn't sleep. The conversation replayed in his mind. He had always seen religious practices as restrictions, burdens, obligations. But what if they were invitations? What if he had been looking at it all wrong? He got up and started reading more, this time not for the case, but for himself. James discovered the concept of Tawheed, the oneness of God. It was so simple, so logical. One creator, no intermediaries, no complicated theology, just pure monotheism. He thought about the Trinity concept he grew up with in Christianity and how he never truly understood it. This made more sense to his rational, legal mind. The trial continued, and James delivered powerful arguments. He presented evidence that Khalid's store policy was clearly stated, that it was his religious right to choose what to sell, that no law required him to sell alcohol. He cited precedents, religious freedom laws, and constitutional rights. The judge listened carefully. But something else was happening inside James. Every night he would read more about Islam. He learned about the Prophet Muhammad's life, his character, his mercy, even to his enemies. He read about how the Prophet established justice in Medina, how he created a society based on equality and human dignity. This was not the image media had painted. James won the case. The judge ruled in Khalid's favor, stating that religious freedom includes the right to operate a business according to one's faith principles. Khalid was overjoyed. He hugged James and invited him to dinner at his home. James accepted, not out of professional courtesy, but genuine curiosity. At Khalid's home that evening, James experienced something he had never felt before. The warmth, the sense of family, the peace in their home. Before dinner, Khalid invited James to join them for Maghrib prayer. James declined but watched. As he saw them stand in rows facing the same direction, rich and poor, young and old, equal before God, something moved in his heart. After dinner, James asked the question that had been building inside him for weeks. "How do you have such peace?" Khalid looked at him with kind eyes and said, "Islam means submission and peace. When you submit to Allah, you find peace, because you know your purpose. You know your Creator is in control. You know this life is a test, and the real life is eternal." James drove home that night with tears in his eyes. For the first time in his adult life, he felt something he couldn't argue away in court. He felt truth. He felt it in his bones, in his soul. He knew what he had to do, but he was terrified. What would his family say? What about his career, his reputation, his entire life? For 3 months, James struggled. He read the Quran cover to cover. He studied Hadith, Islamic history, comparative religion. He looked for contradictions, for reasons to walk away. But everything he found only strengthened his conviction. The scientific miracles in the Quran, the linguistic perfection, the unchanged text for 1,400 years, the transformation it created in people's lives. One Friday, James did something unexpected. He went to the mosque near his office. It was Jumu'ah prayer, and the mosque was full. He stood in the back, watching, listening. The Imam spoke about justice, about standing up for truth even when it's difficult, even when it costs you everything. James felt like the sermon was meant for him. After the prayer, James approached the Imam. His hands were shaking. He said words he never thought he would say. "I want to become Muslim." The Imam smiled warmly and asked, "Are you sure? Have you studied? Have you understood?" James nodded. "I have been studying for months. I know this is truth. I want to take my Shahada." In a small room in that London mosque, surrounded by brothers he had just